Hey Renchang, thanks for your video. Um, I guess let's start with Dawkins, and I'm going to read another quote from his book, Blind Watchmaker, I believe. And he says, "Life is just bytes and bytes and bytes of digital information. This is not a metaphor, it is the plain truth." Um, so, he's not trying to be metaphorical when he talks about genes as information. And if you've read if you've read Dawkins, you know that he's reduced evolution to um, genes, selfish replicators, ignoring the organism, the group of other organisms that the organism is a part, the coevolution with these organisms and their environment. All of that is negligible and unimportant to Dennett or Dawkins. He's reduced everything to the information in genes. Today this is kind of a minority opinion. I think most evolutionary biologists recognize the dynamic process of contextual dependence that the genes have with the organism as a whole, with the society. There's multiple levels of selection and evolution, in other words. But Dawkins' view is still the most popular um, amongst the public, I think. And what he's doing is he's reifying genes as something concrete, when really a gene is quite an abstract term. It really doesn't have any physical embodiment within the cell. A gene is supposed to be that thing that codes for um, a trait in a phenotype, right? But really, there are no sections of the genetic code that always produce or make a single trait. It depends on the context, depends on which cell that length of DNA is in. There's all kinds of regulatory proteins and so forth that are changing depending on context what that length of DNA means. So, yeah, you can talk about genes in a very abstract way, but physically, it's more complicated than that. There's no one-to-one relationship between the gene and the trait. Um, there's not even always a one-to-one relationship between a particular length of DNA and a particular protein, because the way that a protein folds depends on the temperature of the surrounding cellular matrix. The DNA will code always for the same um, sequence of amino acids, but depending on how quickly it spits out that chain from the ribosome in the process of transcription, or translation, excuse me, the protein will fold differently and perform a different function in the body. So it's a very messy process. And to talk about the DNA as though it contained this information is, I think, that's the essentialist position. That's why I call it Platonist, because it's as though he's saying that there's this computer program that exists as information independent of the context of the cell and the other machinery in the cell and the environment that the organism as a whole is embedded within. No, what the genes end up doing is a product of all of that other stuff acting on the genes, which themselves are just this inert molecular chain. Dawkins will talk about DNA as self-replicating. It's not self-replicating. It requires these other proteins and other cellular mechanisms already to be able to reproduce itself. It couldn't do any reproduction or replication on its own. It's replicated by the cell. The cell is the unit of life, not the gene. Um, so Dennett is doing something similar as far as abstraction goes, by seeing the brain as a computer in the head. He's kind of looking at the mind as this abstract informational property, and he therefore thinks you can transfer it to other mediums without much of a problem. Um, I have an issue though with this, because I think there's a huge difference between an organism and a machine, at least any machine or computer that we know of today, or that's even in the works today, that's being developed, because all machines are built from the outside by an intelligent designer, right? Organisms aren't. If you take evolution seriously, organisms grow, they develop, they have a history of being coupled to an environment, to other organisms, and I think our consciousness as organisms, our ability to experience and to feel, is a product of this embodiment as a living creature that is continually producing itself, producing its own boundary, producing the components within that boundary, and you know, it's this self-producing process that you don't find in machines. Um, maybe in the distant future we'll make a self-producing artificial entity of some kind. I'm not closing the door on that, but then we're basically just, we may as well just use the life's own ability to replicate and produce a new being. With bio or genetic engineering, we can certainly produce an artificial organism, I'm sure. But this is a different claim than what Dennett is making, that the mind is information. My ability to feel and experience the world is not bits or bytes of information. It's feeling. I feel the world. I don't process the world in this abstract, representational, symbolic way. I feel the world. I'm in the world. I am the world. Everybody else is the world too. I'm not claiming it's exclusively for me, but there is an intuition that I have that differs starkly from Dennett's understanding of consciousness. And sometimes I think it's just because I've taken mushrooms and he hasn't. It may be that simple, but that's probably an exaggeration. But I don't know where the difference in intuition comes from, but it's definitely there. When it comes to the mind and matter dualism, I would say Dennett is still erecting this dualism because he conceives of the material world as basically a machine. It's a mechanistic, algorithmic process, and he conceives of the mind as the software running on this machine, or the information produced by this machine, or run by this machine. So there's the dualism right there. There's the data and the hard drive, right? The software and the hardware. It's just different words for the same words that the same meaning that Descartes implied when he created this dualism, or at least articulated it in the most famous form we know of today. Whereas I would like to see mind and matter as two parts of the same underlying process, such that the outside, when you look at something, you see it as made completely entirely of matter, and it's basically a mechanism. But then from the inside, from your own experiential point of view, it's conscious, it feels, it knows, right? And both of these are true at the same time, and it takes a shift in our logic to grasp this, or our metaphysics to grasp this, but I think we owe it to ourselves, rather than erecting this false dichotomy. Rather than saying, like Dennett, that mind consciousness is an epiphenomenal result of billions of years of blind evolution, and that it still doesn't really have any say in the rest of evolution's ongoing path. It's kind of like we're not conscious in the way we think we are. We don't have any control. Instead of seeing consciousness in that light, which is a rather negative view of it, I would say that mind and matter were present together from the beginning. Not mind in the complex way that humans are conscious, but just a very primordial and uncomplicated, simple form of experience was present, and is present, in single atoms. Atoms feel other atoms, and that's what we call efficient causation. And through billions of years of evolution, tens of billions of years of evolution, atoms on particular planets and under the right circumstances become molecules, and molecules form cells, and cells form multicellular organisms, and consciousness is always getting more complex each time a more complex society of matter forms. So I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe you get a better idea of why people call me crazy now, but time is up.